Good morning. My name is Tanya Henderson, and I'm going to be talking about fixed assets today with my friend Stephen Chinsky. He is the fixed asset guru, so he is going to be joining me. Hi, Steve. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, Tanya. Great to speak with you, and of course, speak to everybody else listening in. Really excited. A good Sunday here, nice weather, and great to speak about fixed assets all day.
Awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful here today too. And this is going to be we've decided it's a three-part series. We actually did this yesterday. We did a practice round yesterday. So we are doing this in a three-part series because um, we spoke a lot about the setup. So we're going to go over setup, we're going to go over the cards in our second series, and then we're going to go into transactions on the third series. And I'm going to be asking Steve lots of questions, and Steve is going to kind of explain all about fixed assets setup today in our first part. So let's go over and we will start looking at the setup. All right,
Uh,
so Steve, you should be able to see my screen. I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Tanya. Yeah, fixed asset setup. Great granule inside of the Business Central system here. So if you haven't used it yet, please watch our series here, learn about it, and then kind of deploy it in your company. Um, it's there. It's meant to be, to use for depreciation as well as the fact that, you can use it for things like amortization. Maybe you got some other things, but we'll talk about that later on, as we go through this. Tanya and I will banter back and forth about it. Let's talk about the fixed asset setup page here. So obviously on the action bar, you've got general depreciation, posting, journal templates, and related. We'll start with the general. It's a short little screen, not much on it right now. But you've got your default depreciation book. And here it's a simple thing. Always remember you need to set up one book. Most people call it company. Some people call it GAAP. Some people call it whatever, the accounting, whatever you need. But make sure there's one book that will at least set up the ability to both acquire and depreciate your assets, as well as other transactions. But you need to set up one. We'll talk more about what the book means when we get to the depreciation on the action bar. But please set up one. You can set up more. A lot of people say, can I do the tax and other things? But we'll talk about that when we get to depreciation a little bit more. But that's the first field. The second field, allow posting to main assets. It's pretty cool. You sit here and you say to yourself, what does allow posting to main assets mean? And to me, it's, do I have like a main asset? So let's say I'm building a massive conveyor belt system in a distribution center, and it's made up of many components that have layers of conveyor belts, or maybe there are stations within it. And all these assets, or all the conveyor belts, plus all the equipment in between, really belong to the master conveyor belt system. So therefore, why not have a main asset called the master conveyor belt, and then have these children underneath it? So kind of like that parent-child relationship. If you turn it on, it means you're going to you will allow yourself to post to the parent or the master asset. If you say no, then that master asset really is just a roll up of all the children. So think of having 5 children, it rolls up to the family or the main asset. I normally turn it off. It's just a preference. I don't think you should ever post to a main asset. I think you should post to the children, and then children should all roll up to a main asset. But that is, again, a personal preference of mine over doing this for so many decades.
And so that would be the reporting. Is that what you're saying? So if you leave it off, you can report at the main asset, but you're not necessarily posting to that main asset.
You're 100% correct. I mean, and
Okay,
that's what
cool.
I think. That's what I think main assets are for. I mean, I think it's a reporting tool more than it is a posting tool. Allow
Awesome.
FA posting from and to. Funny, as for all of us who have played in BC, that you've
Mhm.
seen this kind of two fields on the general ledger setup. Allow posting from and to. It truly means, what period of time am I going to allow the fixed asset system to post from and to?
Mhm.
Normally, I always recommend people never to fill this in unless you're going to run the fixed asset granular as a subsection, meaning I do not integrate it to the general ledger and I want it to be self-sufficient. I always say that the general ledger setup from and to drive the FA side. So personally, I leave these blank. I do not enter them because obviously I'm integrating the two systems together to allow
Mhm.
to borrow the general ledger setup or the user setup. Don't forget, you can allow the posting from and to on your user setup. So don't forget about that area as well, folks.
Awesome.
Insurance depreciation book and posting. Funny system. I mean, people say insurance. I mean, the funny thing about it is you can actually record things to track your insurance against your fixed asset. It is a cool little tool, very rarely used. I don't think it's used much, at least here in, let's just say here in America, or maybe at least in the implementations I've done over the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a way to track, like if you buy a building, if you buy a car, equipment, and you need to obviously insure them on your general insurance policies, or you've got riders or anything about them, but you can track all the acquisitions in an insurance subledger that actually tracks all that. And it's a cool thing to actually set up what book will capture the insurance here. And if obviously the company book, you'd have the same book to tie to it. But the automatic insurance posting says every time I post an acquisition, please record that in my insurance book. So when my insurance broker calls up and says, show me all your assets, or maybe the auditor says, show me all the insured assets, you can make a list from your insurance book. Nice tool. Cool thing, not necessary, but again, some people say I use Excel. Some people say I use this tool in the system, but cool tool.
And and I've not, I mean, I've never used anything with the insurance pieces on there. And you said you haven't either, really?
I have not. It's a quirky thing. I mean, I just don't think it's necessary to do anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a nice tool. Don't get me wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
think in all the years I've been asking people at different conferences, I've always asked people if they ever used it before. And when I've done sessions on fixed assets, I don't think anybody's ever raised their hand. It's just one of those places, like I said, it's not when you think of fixed assets, I don't really think of insurance per se, but I get why it's
Mm-hmm.
there. It's related to fixed assets. So
Interesting.
I'm sure somewhere in the world somebody wanted this as a functionality and they probably added it.
And Steve, what was really funny is you didn't realize I was doing, and I did just pop the VMix up on my screen because I'm watching the video on my left a little bit over here. So yeah, this has nothing to do with fixed assets, but I'm watching the video on the left, and actually my logo was over my face. Over here, so it was kind of really creepy. So sorry guys, I just it's all live, we're having a good time. So yeah, I was moving myself so that my dogs and my literally my logo is like in my face.
If
So
anybody wants people to start dancing behind me, trust me, I'll yell upstairs and I'll have people coming down here doing whatever they want. If they want people dancing behind me, I will certainly take care of that. If that's one of the requests on the next one, I'll have people dance.
that's too funny. So yeah, so I moved myself over a little bit there. Um, all right, so back to fixed assets.
Yeah. So the
All
numbering
right.
fast tab is pretty simple. I mean, we all know the numbering schema. We've seen it in so many setups areas of the entire Business Central system. You have two.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fixed asset number. I recommend highly that if you do set this up, please make sure you set default as well as the manual. Depending upon each company, some people are very personal when it comes to entering their fixed asset numbers. As Tanya is showing you here, make sure you check the default box, but make sure you check that manual. And again, it's a personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just want the system to give me the next number. Some people say there's sometimes I use like asset tags. When you buy those asset tags from like a Granger or somebody like that, or different companies that offer the asset tags that you can't peel off. They actually make, if you steal something, it has a thing that's stuck there for life.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you can put those asset tag numbers in its place.
Yeah. And I think we were, as we were talking about that too, if you don't have that manual number turned on, you actually don't see the fixed asset number field in the fixed asset card. And I learned that when I was importing fixed assets. I was just kind of like, where's the number field? Where did it go? And I realized it is by default that is not checked. So you do have to come in here and check that.
Yeah, great hint for people throughout the BC system, throughout the
Mm-hmm.
entire package here. If you don't check the box, you're never going to see it. You go to that sales order screen, you always wonder, why is the customer name the first thing you see and not the number? Well, if you got that turned off, you're not going to see the number. So just
Yep.
realize that. Cool hint for everybody today.
Yep.
And again, the insurance one, same thing. It's just an insurance number because every time you book an insurance record, it gives an insurance number. Again, it's an internal audit record. That's all it is, and it's attached to both every insurance record that's added to every acquisition.
Okay.
On the depreciation, up on the action bar, we've got the book and the tables. Let's start with the book. Um, And
That's
again, if
neat.
we go we'll drill into the company book. And remember, anything teal
Hmm.
in the system, BC, remember, teal means I can drill into it. You kind of hover your mouse over it, make the pointer, and then click into it. So that's a cool thing to remember if you're anywhere inside of Business Central. Company book, again, 4 fast tabs: general, integration, duplication, and reporting. We'll start with general first. Um, the code, obviously, company or accounting or gaps. Different people put different things. A description. The default final rounding amount is, what do you want your final rounding amount to be when it comes to, um, you know, posting depreciation? It's a cool thing in that, I mean, personally, I don't understand why I need a final rounding amount, but all in all, I personally like to make sure my rounding amount is defaulted to zero. Kronos uses $10, so obviously it just specifies the final rounding amount to use, if the final rounding amount field is zero. So it will round it to make sure that you're going to make sure it's rounded to a proper number. I want it to round to zero because I want things to equal zero. That's just me.
Hmm.
I'm a true believer in making sure that everything ties to the penny. So that's that field. Obviously, the next field, default ending book value. I think that's self-explanatory.
Yep.
Um, I've seen. I think the funny thing about this is, what do I want my default ending book value to be? And I'm like, well, if I'm depreciating my asset, don't I want it to always be zero? Because I want it to, take the acquisition minus depreciation and equal zero. So I kind of think of it as, why would anybody put anything different than a zero? So it's kind of funny here. But again, I think that's self-explanatory.
So if I have that set to zero, um, do I have to go like -10 if I allow depreciation below zero? I'm going a little bit ahead there on that.
Well, if
I didn't
you,
even know. I'm wondering, can I even do a -10? Nope, you
I,
can't. So,
yeah, I don't think it's going to let you put a negative number in a positive state
yeah.
field. So it
Hmm.
won't let you. So the idea being is, if I put zero there, and then there are other fields that actually say, am I allowed to depreciate below zero? So I think of it as an oxymoron, but I bet you if I put a zero there and I turn something on, I bet you it's going to yell at me anyway. But um, I really truly don't understand. I have a feeling many years ago, somebody probably said, I wanted all my ending book values to be a certain value, like say $100, let's say. Maybe
Hmm.
they were going to sell it. Maybe there was a reasoning behind it. Even though when you think of, I mean, I think of, in the last, let's see, what is it going to be? So in the last 30 years, I've been doing both accounting and then implementing BC and NAV. um, I don't see how I would not let an asset just get to zero and be done with it. And then either you keep it or sell it or dispose of it, when its net book value is zero. But I just haven't figured out a way. Why would I need that question to be answered?
Yeah, I don't I would never want my assets to go below zero. But I did have a customer recently that we were migrating in, and they had assets below zero. And of course, I'm thinking, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And so we didn't import those as a negative. We imported them at zero because they didn't even understand how they got below zero. So it's kind of funny.
And
So
that's the most interesting thing is, I love the BC fixed asset system because of the fact that it is truly a depreciation. It allows you to take that asset and depreciate it, or
mhm.
or if you're talking about intangible stuff, maybe amortize it over a long haul. And it's not meant to go zero unless obviously you could tell it to, but
Right.
it's really not meant to. So. The
Interesting.
next field's easy. Disposal calculation method. There's net and gross. I mean, some people sit there and say, what in the world is net and gross? And to be brutally honest, net, it really just means, there are two methods. Um, if you're going net, you're obviously going to, the net is the net book value. In other words, acquisition minus depreciation equals net when I dispose of it.
Hmm.
Obviously, gross is, I'm looking at it from a gross methodology or the acquisition cost of that. So again, two different methods. I would say almost 100% of the time, it's always going to be the net, because you want to take your acquisition cost on the books, your accumulated depreciation on the books, net it down, and then determine, do I have a gain or loss based on how much money I'm making from that disposal. That's the true method of, for disposal.
Cool.
Subtract discounts and purchase invoice. Cool
Yeah.
idea. Specify, do I allow that line or invoice discount subtracted from the acquisition cost before it's posted to the fixed asset subledger? I mean, I don't see why not, but I bet you 99.9% of the time, if you're booking it from a purchase invoice, if you flag this as true, it's going to take that into account. Don't forget, if I'm putting true line discounts or true invoice discounts, when I book a fixed asset on the purchase invoice, if I'm not checking this box, it's only going to bring over the gross amount to depreciate. If I'm checking this box, it's going to bring over those specific numbers, which, by the way, are separated on the purchase invoice. Or, again, if you meld the two together, if somebody gives you an invoice discount and a line discount, you might enter the entry anyway on the purchase invoice. So the
Hmm.
two are just melded together. So just put yourself in the shoes of the AP clerk who's doing all this. Checking the box is positive just in case they do it separately. That's all.
Okay.
Allow corrections of disposals. Am
Yeah.
I going to allow, this one's a hot one. Am I going to allow somebody to correct my fixed asset ledger entries of the type disposal? Meaning, do you think you're going to make that error? Do you really want somebody to hit the fixed asset subledger in case somebody made a boo-boo? It's a personal preference. Some controllers
Hmm.
say I'll let it. Some controllers say no way, Jose. I'll figure out. I'll do the entry myself manually through the FA journal, and I'll correct it through true entries. I want to see real entries. I don't want to just somebody go in and muck, part of the pun, but muck with the data. They'd rather see the transaction have an audit trail versus somebody just going in there and fixing something. Again, it's totally a personal preference.
Yep.
Allow changes to depreciation fields. Am I going to allow people to change those depreciation fields on like the fixed asset card? Hot topic
Hmm.
lately because I'm I'm sure you've crossed, the fact that do I allow somebody to go in there and change my depreciation fields on that asset
Hmm.
card? So let's say I started my depreciation 1/1/2021 and I have it for 3 years and I've
Hmm.
already started depreciating. Am I going to allow somebody to change those fields? I mean, maybe add a couple of years, take away a year, do some changes along the way while things are happening, obviously, are transacting. Um, it means a lot. I mean, some people say, I screwed up. I would need to make a change. And I get it. I really do. Maybe a 3-year asset should be a 5-year asset or a 5 to a
Right.
7. But the funny thing is, when you finally get to 0, so now the asset's passed, and people get, like, say, for equipment, sometimes they replace the engine or they
Hmm.
replace the main boards, or maybe a total transmission overhaul on a vehicle, and you got to, have a truck and you got an old brand new engine, but it's already fully depreciated. What do you do at that point? It's already past the line. It's 0.
Right.
I can't add years. So when it comes up, I had a customer who that happened to. I've actually told the customer to just create a new asset for just the
Hmm.
engine. Okay, create a parent asset that combine the original truck and the engine to make the truck, let's call it, and go from there, because the engine's going to be depreciated for 3 more years, it's not going to go back to day 1/1/2021 and then and then add depreciation really fast because it's going to go back in time. So
Yep.
um
And
has
then
this ever
as
happened to you?
yeah, so the as we were talking about the chassis. I did an ambulance service, and they had the chassis and the box were different. And so, like I said, the chassis would be depreciated before the box was like a 20-year box.
Oh,
So,
wow.
keeping those separate and essentially, the chassis is now fully depreciated, but the box has still got, 10 more years on it. So yeah, definitely, you don't want to change that because I've put a new chassis on this box. Definitely have those as separate assets and not allow those changes. Unless, like you said, in GP, it used to say, you're changing a depreciation sensitive field. Are you sure you want to do this? I don't know if BC actually does that. I don't think it warns you. I think it just lets you change the field. Do you know?
I
If you
don't
change a
know.
depreciation, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it does. I think it just lets you change it, like you said. So it's
Not no. If I go in right now and I change my fields it's just going to say I'm changing. As long, I'm just changing my fields. That's all it's going to do is just
yeah.
update my data, nothing more.
So yeah, I would probably leave it turned off personally. And then if I have to do something and I know I have to do it, I'd probably turn it on, make the change, like you said, and then it would catch up the depreciation the next time I ran depreciation, but I'd probably turn it back off. So people aren't
Yeah,
just able
I'm
to
totally.
change those.
Yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
you on that one. I mean,
Yeah.
even the next field, tax on net disposal entries. I mean,
Hmm.
it's the sentence is pretty self-explanatory. Do you tax on net
Yeah.
disposal entries? So if I sell a fixed asset with net disposal method, do I want tax on that? And again, that's a funny thing. I mean, this one's very personal. In that, I remember when I was a controller and I sold, people bought the laptops when they were paid. We were getting new laptops. We had old laptops. So, we asked the employees, do you want them? All of them, we say to them, you wanted a laptop? It's like $50, $100, something like that. It's dirt cheap money way back when assets were thousands of dollars. So for most people, it was like a dream come true. I'm not going to tax somebody for it. Um,
Hmm.
I get the premise on it, for the taxing, especially tax on disposals, especially, as it relates to maybe, VAT and some other areas here. But
Hmm.
again, I always leave it off. I personally think it's a personal thing that, mostly accounting departments will take care of that if they have to deal with that. Allow identical document numbers. Kind of a funny thing here, to allow the identical document number in the depreciation books. So they basically, do I allow the same document number in one book and the other book and stuff like that? So,
Hmm.
obviously it's important. If you want that, great. If not, it will not allow it. It's, just a yes or no answer. Allow indexation. Here you're basically indexing both the FA ledger entry and the maintenance ledger entry. So the two both are indexed. I mean, I don't see the premise for this personally. Again,
Hmm.
it's my personal observation that, both tables are, they're pretty easy to export to Excel, or if I really need to write a report, using one of the reporting tools like a Power BI or Jet, or even do anything inside of BC. I
Yeah.
don't see what I need to
Interesting.
index it for, because I think they're pretty decent, letters, and most of the time they're always small anyway in nature. Allow depreciation below zero. I know this is like the epitome of
Yeah.
the oxymoron. It's like, will I depreciate, past the net book value of zero? And it's like saying, okay, wait a minute. I just told the system my default ending book value needs to be zero. And now you're
Hmm.
asking me a question, will I allow depreciation below zero? And I'm like, well, no. I'm like, why would I
No.
turn this on? I'm like, it's so funny. I don't know. Well, how do you feel about that field? It's just so
I
funny.
definitely I don't turn that on. Absolutely not. I mean I don't understand. I mean, so I can go to negative value on my asset. I'm like, why? I'm not sure why you would ever do that.
And yeah, and it's like, wait a minute, I've literally broken, when you think of, again, unless there's something, I can't think of any statutory requirement, and any accountant anywhere in the world, I think, would ever go at below zero. So it's kind of like that. If I did that by accident, I would have to find it, then I'd have to adjust it manually. So it's kind
Right.
of like, I don't know why it's here, and I personally think it should be removed,
Hmm.
because I think the calculate depreciation batch job should look at the system. It knows how to calculate depreciation. It knows what's left, and if you're getting towards the number zero, the last depreciation entry is going to be what's left. It
Right.
might not be the exact number it was the month before, but it'll always get me to zero. So I think this toggle switch should be removed. That's just me personally.
Yeah.
This next one is funny, because between
Yeah.
this one and the last one, it's kind of like, again, it's that old oxymoron. It's like,
Hmm.
am I a calendar year company, 365 days a year? Am I a fiscal year company, 365 days a year? But when you do 365-day depreciation, you got 31 days, 30 days, and 28 days, sometimes even 29 days. So the system is going to calculate depreciation, and it's going to have that ebb and flow. It's going to it's that small roller coaster ride that your child rides.
Hmm.
And the number is going to fluctuate. And it's also going to have, there's also rounding that goes along with that, because depending upon the amount of the acquisition over the number of days and years and stuff like that. So personally, using the allow more than 360, 365 days and the fiscal year 365 days questions that are to be
Hmm.
answered here. The question here is, do I just want to have an even keel depreciation methodology, which is, let's just use 360. It's a nice number. It means 30 days per month, all months, all 12 months are 30 days each. The number will be exactly the same for the life of the asset until you get to the last one. Of course, then it'll get it down to zero. Um,
Yeah.
but it's a nice, smooth, it's like a nice boat ride, I call it. So, again, to me, these two, again, one question, allow more. I don't think it should be there because why would I allow more when you're already asking the question, am I at 365 days? If I'm 365 days, then obviously I'm going to book my depreciation based on that rule. If I'm not,
Right.
I want to book it based on 360. So why are you asking me allow more? So again, one of those, I think another question that doesn't belong there, even though you're asking me again down below. But that's,
Yeah, I was
and
gonna say, so what's the difference between those two then?
I think I don't know what the difference is. I know the fiscal year personally is just it's a yes or no question. Am I going
Hmm.
to go 365 or 360? So it's either I want 30 days per month, 12 months a year, or am I going to fluctuate between, 30, 31, 28, 29? So that's the bottom question. The allow more than 360 is okay. If your fiscal year has more than 360 depreciation days, which it guess what? 365 is more, turn it on.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute, didn't you just ask me that question down below? So
Right.
again, like I think when Microsoft was doing this, I think maybe somebody asked for the fiscal year question, but didn't realize you already asked the question above and didn't, it was to me, it's the same question, just two
Twice.
different.
Two different ways. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, the next three are kind of funny. Not
Yeah.
funny, but I always turn them on, period. Do I use
Mhm.
the fixed asset ledger check? Heck yeah. I wanted to check my ledger each and every time I post a transaction. I want to make sure that I am in check, I'm valid, check it before I'm posting any journal lines to make sure there's no errors, no issues. So
Mhm.
obviously I would answer that yes. Again, one of those, again, another question that probably should always be on true, maybe not even ask, maybe just make it part of the software. The
Yeah.
use reuse rounding into periodic depreciation. I'm like, that when you run the calculate depreciation engine, the batch job, it's got to go out, take a value that you start at the acquisition, figure out the years, figure out the days, figure out and calculate what depreciation needs to be for that month. And there's going to be a time when there's rounding possibly because of the division of
Hmm.
that, number of years, number of months, the whole bit. It's going to three decimals, four decimals possibly. So you want to make sure you round to a whole, to obviously a whole number, two decimal places, obviously. So heck yeah, why wouldn't I turn this on? I want to make sure it's on because, the division does create multiple decimal places. Um, Use the same FANGL posting date. I think was
Why
again,
would you
some of these
not?
questions are just funny. I mean, how do you think about this one? This one's
Oh,
just hilarious.
well, you know what? In GP, it always had, I don't know, your subledger and your general ledger. So you could actually in GP post to the subledger and delete the general ledger, or
Cool.
post, or you could turn it off. You could actually turn it off so that it would hit the subledger and never hit the general ledger. So, I mean, and people did it on accident all the time. We had to recreate entries to the GL when that happened. And so, I post in 1 month to the subledger and I post in another month to the general ledger. It was very flexible, I'll call it in that. But you constantly were, chasing down transactions and trying to figure out why one report, which I ran by the document date, and the other, I run that same exact report by the general ledger date, and I had two different results. So, I don't see that in BC a lot just because, it's almost like posting date is the date, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
So,
would see this turned on to be true. I mean, never,
yeah.
ever, ever. You would have to, make a great, a great dispositioning to me of why I should turn this to be false. I just don't see the
Hmm.
practicality of it because it would ruin all my reporting. It would ruin me tying subledger posting dates to general ledger posting dates.
Yep.
Um, and I just don't see the practicality in it.
So
So
somebody out there is going to like slam us for that because they're going to say, "Well, I need it to post." Somebody's going to watch this and come back and give us a reason. I know that.
I hope
All
they
right.
do. I mean, it sounds funny, but
Yeah.
it's like if you can come up with a real true reason why the
Mhm.
FA subledger should be different from the general ledger, then I say throw it at us because I'd love to
Yeah.
learn too. I mean, but like I said, you'd have to convince me why, and maybe there is a reason why out there.
Yeah.
Um, Integration fast tab. I mean, I think that stands on its own 2 feet. It's
Hmm.
pretty self-explanatory. Um, Again, if you're going to integrate with the general ledger, you obviously want to turn all these on. Custom, again, very rare that you would ever turn it on because the chance of you coming, obviously, customizing your depreciation methodology, custom tables and stuff like that, you need it. So those two normally are turned off because nobody uses custom nowadays. It's pretty straightforward. You have your accounting books and you use the basic methodology in the accounting depreciation, and maybe you are going to do a custom depreciation table, hence you'd have some custom there. But again, for the 99.99% of the time, acquisition, depreciation, write down, appreciation, disposal, and maintenance are always turned on. And again, you don't have to turn maintenance on if you're never using it, but all the other ones, turn on. Make sure they're off when you're bringing the system live because you have to bring in all the assets for the first time. Make sure that's off. Make sure when you run after you bring your acquisitions in and you run the depreciation for the first time to catch it up to make sure it equals the accumulated depreciation. Then turn it back on. I mean, it is funny when you get those messages that says, "Hey, it's not integrated," and you kind of wonder why.
So you just said something that I don't necessarily do. So when you said you bring your assets in, if I'm taking somebody from one system to another, I bring in my assets, right? And post the assets and I do an acquisition. So I bring in
Yeah.
the acquisition amount. I actually bring in the original cost basis. And then I bring in the depreciation to date.
Okay.
And then the asset's technically ready to go. Is
Yeah,
that
I
the way
do.
you do it?
No, I do it in a totally different method. I
Interesting.
bring in the acquisition as on the date the acquisition took place. So the true acquisition date
Right.
of that asset. So
Mm-hmm.
you and I are totally on the same page.
Yep.
I let BC perform a depreciation catch up through a point in time. So let's say, for instance, I'm bringing a company on and it's,
Interesting.
1/31/2022. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing all the assets in and I'll run depreciation, a batch job, FA, not integrated, just run the batch job, catch them
Right.
all up through 1/31/2022. I'll print the report out by asset, tells me what my net book value is by asset.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have the customer I'm working with tie it out and make sure that every asset equals everything. Now, everybody always asks me, why in God's green earth would I do that when I've got the number sitting right in front of me? I could just
Right.
book it and tie it out. Um, to me, BC is a fixed asset system. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you might have come from a great fixed asset system. It might have been done on an Excel spreadsheet and you've got
Mm-hmm.
great formulas in place. But I want BC to go back, take that number, figure out whether I'm booking it 360 or 365 and run the depreciation for me as if it was there since day one. And
Mm-hmm.
then because I could do, and like I said, have the acquisition, like you said, add your depreciation or accumulated in there and then
Mm-hmm.
then go forward from there. I'd rather BC start from scratch and have all the numbers in place, all the history in place as if it took, did everything itself, and then figure out if I do have any differences. The chances of you have differences, it's possible. It really is. Don't get me wrong here
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know where the numbers are coming from and I certainly don't know how it was calculated. I mean, for me to have a couple of penny differences, a couple of dollar differences, I can adjust the system accordingly. Whether I make a change to the general ledger, or whether maybe one asset is so grossly off, I can fix the one asset using
Mm-hmm.
booking that an extra entry to book more more accumulated depreciation.
Interesting.
That's why. I. It's funny. I once learned that from when I first learned the vision back in 2000. I was
Mm-hmm.
learning version, um, 2.5, and 2 when I was, learning it. Um,
When
I
he was
asked
just a baby.
when I was a baby, I was in diapers and I was driving my little,
Scooter.
uh, my little scooter to class.
Big wheel.
Um,
Wasn't it called a big
I-
wheel?
yes, big wheel back then. I drove my big wheel down to Atlanta and I basically went in and, person teaching me was, a CPA and he was, support
Mm-hmm.
staff. uh, I asked the same question and he said the same thing. And, it's why not let the system do it for you and just
Interesting.
not be worried that the data is always going to be right going forward. And it made practical sense. Ironically enough, it actually did because a lot of
Hmm.
times when I talk to customers, they don't have great fixed asset systems. Some say, oh, my
Yeah.
accountant does it on an Excel spreadsheet, or I have an Excel spreadsheet, or yes, maybe there is a fixed asset system, which is great. Don't get me wrong here, but
Hmm.
um, I don't, different different accounting systems have different engines and do different things, sometimes do different
Right.
things, do it differently. That's all.
And I came from GP, which does have a fairly good fixed asset system too. So, coming from GP into BC, I just always figure out like, I kind of think of it as payroll too, is it's almost never going to match. Does that make sense? I always feel like it's never going to 100% match. You're always going to be a penny off somewhere. So I'm just like, just let's put the number in. And then going forward, I'll run a projection and I'll say, this is what it thinks it's going to depreciate going forward. And it's, not every asset is off, but a lot of them are, they're a little bit off, within a dollar or so. And most customers are like, okay, and my answer is, well, you're depreciating this way in this system and it's a new system. It's not going to be 100% the same.
Yeah, and
So,
that's why and most people don't care. I mean,
yeah.
ironically enough, I think most people are respectful of the fact that what I did was good audit responsibility, good asset
Hmm.
responsibility, and I can tie everything out to show what I did anyway. So it's
Interesting.
something that's not bad. So the
Yeah.
next two
Well,
tabs
I'll
are
have to
pretty
try it.
funny. Yeah, I would try it. I think duplication and reporting. So duplication really stands for if you would never do it on your company book ever, first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. You would actually do it on the second book. So mentioned earlier when we first started our conversation, you
Mm-hmm.
have your company book for GAAP, accounting, whatever, but you can also do tax books, state tax, federal tax. You can set up other books to capture the tax depreciation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know it's going to seem weird because if I set up a tax book or a state book, I can add them to my duplication list because when I run my depreciation, you can tell the system, please depreciate my tax book, my federal book, please depreciate my state book. But also, when you're acquiring an asset, you have a checkbox on the purchase invoice that says add to duplication list, and you're adding it to all the different adding it to all the different books that are duplicated.
Okay.
So that's what the list is for.
Mm.
Um, very, very popular if you are going to keep your tax books. A lot of people say my tax accountant does that. I don't want to deal with it. And you know what? That's a good thing too, because if a
Mm-hmm.
tax accountant's doing it and charging you for it, you might as well leave it to them.
Yep.
Um, the chance of, the FA exchange rate in
Mm-hmm.
duplication, really, I don't see the practicality behind it, but there must be a reason. At least in the, let's just say, North American space, I've never used it ever because why? My price when I buy my asset is my price when I'm putting it in my
Mm-hmm.
state book, my, state or my federal book. So there's no currency exchange issue going on. So I don't have never turned it on in all my years. And I know it's there for strictly just converting it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Reporting, the last one is a pretty simple subject. So for all of us who've been on the company information screen, there's like always a question, do I have additional reporting currencies? So a good example is I'm in Canada, I have a Canadian dollar, or Mexico is a Mexican pesos, or England, British pound. And I want to report back because my parent company is in US dollars. So therefore, my additional reporting currency for all my companies or these environments are going to be USD. And therefore, every time I post something, it's going to put it in my local currency and my additional reporting currency. Same holds true here. Do I want my fixed asset subledger to show the same thing in the additional reporting currency? Yes or no? And then turning all this on will do the same thing as you transact. Leaving it off, it doesn't do anything here. So that's if you want it again to do that. And in this fixed asset subledger, that's in this depreciation book as well. So it's going to do both in there if you truly want it. Um, if
And
you're
it's
asking,
not just reporting.
yeah, it's
It,
it's more than it's more than that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So when I looked at it the very first time, I thought it said report. I didn't even see the additional currency, so I was like, "Yeah, I want report." So I turned them all on, and then I went to go post something, and it was like, "Yeah, you need to have your exchange rate set up." And I'm like, "Why do I need that? I don't have multi currency." And then I realized I came back in here and looked at that. I was like, "Oh, I don't want any of that on." So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it.
an ugly thing,
Mm-hmm.
because when you do that, as you post your acquisition, let's say I have a Canadian dollar. So as I post my acquisition transaction, it's going to book the typical entry, Canadian dollar, but also an additional reporting currency on that line as well. Same with depreciation. You run your depreciation batch job, it books Canadian dollar, but all of a sudden, every entry also has that US dollar additional reporting currency. If you like that, great. Again, not necessary if you don't want to, but if you do want to have the subledger to be in that state of mind, then by all means turn them all on. And again, it's a personal preference at this point.
Yeah. All right.
The
I'm
big,
going to go out of this window and get back to our main window here because we'll have the same options out here.
absolutely.
All right. So we do have depreciation tables here.
We do. And a quick thing about depreciation tables is this. There are none that come with BC out of the box because it's something about creating your own depreciation methodology. Now, most people say, what? What the heck does that mean? I'm like, the only true depreciation table one might want to add is a couple of things. First and foremost is, at least in the United States, we have bonus on we have asset, you acquire a fixed asset, you get the bonus, 50% bonus. Well, that's one kind of depreciation table where in the first year you're taking 50%, and then year 2 and 3, you're going to take a different percentage point, which the IRS gives you the guidelines for. The most famous one, at least in the United States, is called MAKERS, the Modified Accelerated Plan for Depreciation of All Assets, 3, 5, 7, and subsequent years, and higher, different assets, more years, like leasehold improvements and things like that. Those are tables that the IRS outlines, publishes, and those tables can be set up in the system, and you can certainly attach them. There are some smaller companies that love using MAKERS as their true depreciation methodology, not the typical straight line double declining, but use MAKERS anyway. And then there are people who use tax books that will put the MAKERS tables on those, so that way when they run those extra tax depreciation books, tax books, then they can give them to their tax accountant, and they can see the entries are made for them, giving them all the calculations. Now, again, it's not here, but as a courtesy from Tanya and I, if you want these MAKERS tables, if you want to see all the depreciation table cards, if you want them filled out, certainly you can get a hold of us, and then basically we can email them to you, all the depreciation table cards that belong to the MAKERS environment, if you're obviously in the States here, United States.
All right. So I think we hit everything on the depreciation.
Yes, we
We
did.
didn't talk about the general and the classes and everything, but I think we should do posting first because I think that kind of helps drive the other pieces.
I agree with you. I do. I
Yep.
mean, so this one's a funny one, the FA posting type setup. I mean, when I saw this for the first time, I actually, was sitting there going, what in the world are you asking me here? I mean, like, this should all be self-explanatory, meaning the system should know all these answers, not me as a user. Why would I have to answer these questions? So it's kind of like saying, if I'm doing a write down posting type, and I'm looking at my, my entry here, am I looking at it, am I looking at the different columns? Am I part of the book value? Am I affecting that? Absolutely. If I write down, I'm going to affect part of the book value now. I'm going lower. Do I affect part of the depreciation basis? No, I'm not really affecting that when I'm writing it down. It will be included in future depreciation calculations because I'm going lower based on the new net book value of that. Do I include this type of transaction entry in a gain or loss, for a sold asset? Absolutely. Is my depreciation, in terms of depreciation types, specifies that, does this have impact into the total depreciation of my asset? Of course, write down has impact into that because, I'm going to write it down, which means I'm going to have to recalculate my new depreciation value to figure out how much is left, divide it over the length of what's left, and come up with a new depreciation monthly amount. And obviously the sign is if I'm writing something down, what's a typical sign, positive or negative? And obviously it's negative. So as you're looking at the first 4 rows on the screen here, write down appreciation. Again, the words are self-explanatory and kind of what I'm affecting. If I raise my asset, I will affect the new depreciation basis because my number is going to gross up. Okay, I have to, my value goes up in terms of it's a whole new starting point. And yes, it's almost like a new acquisition. The new engine Tanya and I spoke about, where Tanya was talking about the chassis and the box. and I was talking about the engine, I'm acquiring some new part, a new asset to raise the value of that asset. So obviously it's an acquisition. Um, Custom is custom, obviously, and those, of course, will affect those different areas. But the next four below the word custom too, it's duplicated, and
Yeah, they're all
I've
the
never
same.
figured out. I've never figured out why. It's like it's the strangest thing I've seen in BC. It's like somebody put them in here twice, but I've never figured out the why question. So I stay away from it.
And you
Because
can't delete them, it doesn't look like.
no, just
I
don't
just,
know why. I mean, I think the only person who can really delete them, you can always ask your programmer, probably in the back, I call it in the
mhm,
back to remove them for you, but there's no
right.
harm, no foul here. It's
Yeah.
I think this should be predefined, and like Microsoft should just set this up for us and just leave it alone and never really ask the question. So
So in other words,
that's
you don't have to change anything on that window.
I would never. I mean, Kronos actually has them all checked off perfectly. Copy
Hmm.
Kronos, and you're none the wiser. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't second guess yourself. This is a typical way it's answered that you're showing us on the screen.
Yeah. This is a big one.
Yeah, this is probably one of those, where we've all been around the infamous posting setups and things like that, and all the different
Hmm.
areas we go into in BC. But this is a big one. I mean,
Hmm.
you truly need to sit here and sit with your, whether whoever's building the system out, if you're the accounting manager, controller, whatever, you should list out all of your asset types on the side and the left-hand column, the code. And then, of course, every column thereafter is where am I posting all my transaction types to? So if you think about it, you see all the fixed asset ones here. You got your equipment, furniture, leasehold, plant, property, vehicles. I got my vehicle here. Got that. How to do that is my joke for today. Um, so there's my vehicle, so my asset. But overall here, in addition to that, don't forget about the other things we talked about, and we'll see that a little further when we get to FA classes. You have goodwill, you have intellectual properties, and you have patents. So you can amortize those as well. So don't forget about those.
And I
And
and I have to show this too because as I was going and doing a sale on an asset, I actually got an error message because I was trying to do a disposal through a sales transaction. And actually, this field is not on this window. We added it yesterday in our pre demo. But this field wasn't on there. So I actually had to go find it. And then I happened to notice all of these other fields that you could add to this window, which I thought, okay, is there anything else I need to add? This is crazy. There's tons of fields on here that aren't out of the box added. So I did add these two fields here because those are ones that I noticed that I actually needed.
yeah, I mean, there's so many other ancillary fields in this
Mm-hmm.
list in the real table here in the posting
Mm-hmm.
FA posting group table itself.
Yeah.
Um, some of them are just so, I mean, it's all about the transaction, which is how you found yours, the
Mm-hmm.
sale account on
Mm-hmm.
disposal. And then, of course, if I'm writing down an asset and I need to,
Mm-hmm.
what expense account is that going to go down? What expense should I book that write down to? Or because obviously if I'm writing it down like a $10,000 asset and I want to write it down to say $5,000, what's it going to book the net to? Again, when you have to think about this in net terms, but what account should I post that to? A write
Mm-hmm.
down. I'm not talking a disposal, but this is the write down transaction. You see the columns all talk about disposal, 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 but the write down word was missing. So you are correct. If I'm doing a write down, you need the write down column. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
doing disposals, make sure you have all your disposal columns. If I'm doing a sale on disposal, where should the sale go? Acquisition is pretty self-explanatory and accumulated. Everybody knows that one. Obviously,
Right.
gain or loss on anything, and then of course your accumulated, the depreciation expense account, which is all the way to the right.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you just fill them in, and don't get me wrong here. You're not going to be the first person in the world in the probably multiple decades this software has been around to do a transaction. You're going to get an error message, and when you find it, you'll go fix it and you'll move on. But that's FA posting group.
And don't follow what's in Chronos because all of these accounts should not be the same,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
I love that.
Cronus is
It's
pretty
like,
funny.
really? You just post all of the same? I'm like, that's not right.
Yeah, that's
So,
the one thing about Kronos. Remember, Kronos is a beautiful thing. I
mhm.
like the setups they've done. It's kind of like
Mhm.
that helpful stepping stone.
Yep.
But please, God, just look at the GL accounts they're putting here. A lot of times when whoever's setting up the Chronos system, sometimes they just put an account here just to show you the columns they're filling in that they feel are necessary, but it's not the real GL account it should belong to. So always double check your work if you're going to use it as a helpful tool.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. All right, so I think we've gone through posting here. I'm going to go back to general now because this, I kind of feel like it goes with it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Tanya. These two go hand in foot. Um, when you think about your FA classes, there's three types in the world today. There are people who have financial fixed assets. It's just, financially based fixed assets for whatever reason. So, somebody wants to make a financial asset. It's not like it's a tangible thing or an intangible thing, but it's more financially based. And somebody wants to just amortize that asset. Some people have intangibles. You saw some intangible assets, goodwill and things like that. You saw tangible, you got buildings and vehicles and furniture and fixtures and equipment and things like that. So classify your assets right, because when the auditor comes around and he says, give me a list of all my tangibles, give me a list of intangibles, give me a list of financials. So a great report you can spit out because you've got the FA class to filter by. So
Hmm.
end of the year comes around and you can give them the report in 3 seconds.
Yep. And then the subclasses, which we
Ah,
kind of looked at.
yeah, this one I love. I mean, to me, this is like one of the most important ones to fill out correctly. And you're
Hmm.
doing that because you want your data entry to be smooth and clean when you're making those fixed asset cards. And I mean, if you smack your hand, if you forget to do this one,
Hmm.
because obviously the codes, pretty much all my FA subclasses, it almost looks like it's the same, as the list you just saw in my posting groups, but that's because these are all my reporting fixed asset classes. I mean, I am going to report
Hmm.
on everything from equipment all the way down to vehicles. I'm going to define them under three FA classes: tangible, intangible, financial. Okay. And I'm going to also tell them what posting group to use to show my GL accounts. So think about that. I went to one screen. I created all my different codes that classify my assets. I created an FA class to just summarize them as a higher up parent child relationship.
Hmm.
And I've also given it all the GL accounts it's going to post to for every transaction on one screen. And I set it up once and I'm done.
Yep. Makes it
And
a
last,
lot easier during setup.
oh God, yes. It's so much easier. I mean, there are people who don't fill it out, but again, you don't
Hmm.
have to. There's nothing that says you must. But then again, you're doing it all manually. Then you have to fill in all the screens on the FA card, which we'll show them in our next session. Locations. This is not the same word. Locate FA location is does not. It's not the same word as locations, which are inventory locations for warehousing. This is where fixed assets are located, and I truly believe in this um, feature in the fixed assets because auditors who come in will always say, give me a list of your assets. I want to go look at them. Physically go
Hmm.
find them. And the way to find them is to figure out what FA location they're in. So I will certainly mark every one of my FA fixed asset cards with an FA location so that they can find them. So if somebody comes in and the order says, I'm going out to the plant, building one, and I want to see all the assets in building one, and I can
Hmm.
give them a report by building one. So please fill this out. It is great for those people who do fixed asset internal audits and fixed assets external accountant audits.
All right.
These two, these are fun. Um, we've got the FA journal template here. There's really only two you have to prepare for: assets and recurring. Just copy them from Kronos. Make your life easier. Just
Hmm.
these are the only two you really need. Assets because your acquisitions will go through here, or your depreciation GL journal will pass through this as well. So you just set it up once. Make sure you put a number series there so it has the next number series. Normally people do exactly what it says here: FA journal hyphen GL, and you're pretty much done. The recurring one's funny. Um, I think Tanya and I were goofing about it yesterday on our little
Hmm.
practice run we did. Um, I said, it's here, you create it, and then Tanya asked me the question. It's like, what do I use it for? And I sat there and I said, I was completely dumbfounded because I said, well, I guess you can use it for depreciation entry. And I'm
Hmm.
like, well, why would I create a recurring fixed asset GL journal for depreciation when the system will do the batch job and post it, of course, to the asset. And I guess, like I said, I guess if you want to do it yourself manually, maybe, or maybe you're doing something really obscure and you don't want the batch job to run for something and you want to use a recurring journal. Again, I've never come up with an idea or a reason in all the years to why I would do recurring general GL journals in fixed assets.
Hmm.
Versus what the system does. So you made me laugh. That's basically it because I really didn't have a good answer.
Yeah. And I think our last one is the reclass journal templates too. So that's
Very
pretty.
important. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've done this before, but obviously make
Hmm.
sure you have your reclass because if you need to move an asset from one place to another, one location to another, just like we do in you think of the same thing as reclassing items. You have a reclass journal for items. You think
Hmm.
of you're moving your assets around. So make sure you set one up because you want to move your assets from one
Assets.
location to the other.
Move your assets.
Move those assets you got.
All right. I think we have. So this basically our related is going to be about the same thing. So we've gotten through, I think, most of the setup on here.
Yeah, we have. I mean, pretty much if you can fill this one page out and all of its sub pages that go along with it,
Hmm.
you really are you're ready to rock and roll. You're ready to just get started. You're ready to talk about, getting migrating your assets into the system and setting it up, getting those. Now talk about that asset card, getting started. Talking maybe we talk a little bit about in our next session. We can talk about using a config package to get the assets in there and the asset cards and stuff like that. But overall, you're really ready to go. There's nothing more to set up. Um, just get started.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to complete this session then, and we will, in our next session, we will move to the fixed asset card. So that'll be our part two. That one probably won't be as long as this one. So we will basically, do that next. All right. So if you guys have any questions for Steve or I, we're going to put our connection information up there too. So you feel free to reach out to either one of us. We are happy to help you on any fixed asset setup questions. Thank you,
Absolutely.
everyone. Have a great day.